Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Resourcing Tomorrow, and thank you, dear audience, for joining us this afternoon to this exquisite panel. I will briefly introduce all of the panelists, and then I will kick off with questions to the panel. But I also invite you already to think about good questions that you will ask later. We have 40 minutes, so from your right and my right, we have Zoe White, Head of Industry Partnerships and Policy at NATO. Next to her, Anne Lauenroth, Deputy Head of Department, International Cooperation, Security, Raw Materials and Space at the Federation of German Industries, BDI. Then we have Allard Castelein, Special Representative for Raw Materials Strategy at the Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs. Then we have Peter Handley, Strategic Advisor at the Hague Center of Strategic Studies and Senior Fellow at the European Initiative for Energy Security, former Head of Unit at the European Commission. And then on the left, Adam Burstein, Technical Director, Strategic Critical Materials in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, Acquisition and Sustainment at the US government. So, yes, a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you very much. Let me immediately kick off with you, Adam, since you had the longest way to come to this conference. How well are raw materials dependencies understood up the mining stage, and what raw materials supply risks has the US identified, and what are the solutions? Please.
Yeah, Rolf, thank you very much, and thank you, obviously, to Resourcing Tomorrow for the opportunity to speak here to this, distinguished group that we all have the pleasure of this company. Really, I want to kick off, I think, by talking about sort of what the U.S. government is doing holistically in this space. We've seen a huge amount of momentum recently with the current administration. So just an acceleration and recognition of the problem, and then a real focus. We had 6 executive orders published by the president just within the first few months of the Trump administration, many of which were either entirely focused or partially focused on the critical minerals challenges facing us today. A lot of that is because, obviously, economic security equates to national security, and there's this recognition that if we don't fix these challenges now and really get ahead of, attack opportunities and get ahead of what some, adversarial, potential that exists out there, we're really doing ourselves a disservice. So in light of that, we've seen quite a bit of crowding in of funding, for example. So not only do we have now a whole of government effort to get after the problem, but we've really seen even our Congress help resource the problem to the tune of, very publicly, we have $5 billion for critical minerals just in the office that I represent. We have $1 billion that underpins $100 billion in loan authorities through the Office of Strategic Capital in our office. We've seen $2 billion come in for stockpiling, which represents an 8-fold increase over the aggregate amount that the stockpile has received really since the end of the Cold War. And we've seen a flood of resources across government agencies, energy, commerce, et cetera. And we're all collectively trying to address this problem. So it's a very exciting time, of course, to be in this sector, as I hope all of you realize, and all of you are clearly part of the solution as well. And I welcome the partnership. Rolf, directly to your question about how well we understand raw material dependencies, it's a tricky wicket, as they say, right? I think I'm going to give a 2-part and rather incomplete and unsatisfactory answer, I think, to the question, which is I think we understand our dependencies well enough to be actively tackling the problems, right? We understand from a weapon system side and a end item side where a lot of the materials come from, what materials are needed. Oftentimes, the quantities required, if not perfectly, then at least an order of magnitude. And that's certainly enough information for us to really tackle the problem, to start making investments in and prioritize our investments, prioritize our focus areas, and get after the problem. On the flip side of that, however, we all know that these supply chains are incredibly opaque. Sometimes it's due to apathy, sometimes it's very intentional. You know, we live in a sector where you know, a lot of our industry players are actively obfuscating their transactions and agreements. And so I would question whether anybody has, you know, certainly a perfect view of our raw material dependencies. So I think there's definitely a shortage of that perfect knowledge, but we certainly have enough information to tackle our challenges. And you know, every day we're getting better at finding those really niche areas in these supply chains that where you know our dependencies are not well understood. And I'll just give the example of chemical inputs and the equipment. You know, both needed for our supply chain. So you can understand from upstream, from the mine, to, you know, the magnet or the metal, all of the sort of steps along the way, and how much capacity is needed and what capabilities are needed. But then looking at the equipment that is needed to produce, you know, that product or you know, impact that stage of the supply chain, and what the supply chains are for the equipment and the chemical inputs is really, really difficult, a wicked problem to get after. To your questions about what risks have we identified, I mean, I'm not going to get into specific, you know, raw material supply chain risks, but sort of looking at the problem holistically, you know, we're faced with single points of failure, you know, being you know, either a single producer in a nation, single producer domestically, you know, something where just, you know, a weather event, some sort of emergency, you know, sabotage can just take out an entire supply chain. We're looking at, you know, foreign dependencies, which in and of themselves may be fine, but, you know, again, if you don't have the redundancy in your supply chain, then you're just leaving yourself open to severe risk. So obviously we need to mitigate those particular challenges. But most importantly, perhaps, to succeeding in this may actually be public messaging. So I don't know that we're doing a good enough job with this. We're certainly starting to. You see all of the news on critical minerals coming out in the United States. And we're seeing this become a more focused issue globally. But until we have buy-in from, you know, the citizenry writ large to mobilize industry, to mobilize capital, to mobilize you know, national treasure to address these issues, I think we're still going to fall short. But we are certainly making a lot of progress in the area.
Yes, thanks, Adam. And this clearly highlights that we need to have good accountants of all our input and output on material. And that also leads to a question now more from a German and European perspective, because we largely rely on the defense industry in the US also for our sourcing of defense materials. I would like to ask Anne here, for the German BDI Industry Association, what are the barriers to diversification, reshoring, and reducing resilience on unstable supply chains? And how does the defense industry compare to other sectors in Germany?
Yeah, first of all, also from my part, thanks very much for the invitation. I think it's an excellent conference and I think excellent gathering of people with very different expertise. And I think you mentioned that or described that very well, that actually in tackling the challenge and the problem, you need a lot of different expertise to come together when you look at the whole value chains. First of all, I think for the German and European point of view, it's important to acknowledge actually that resource security and national security are or European security are two parts of the same coin. So really that kind of without securing the supply chains for the defense sector and for the rearmament production, this has immediate implications also for your deterrence readiness and the international commitment. So I think this is key to acknowledge this, and I think both the German government and also the European leadership has acknowledged this. At the same time, also looking forefront, it's also interesting to look at kind of how, with regard to the demand also for future technologies, you have a high demand for critical raw materials in general. So because the whole perspective of high-tech warfare also demands a lot of more of these critical minerals in order to be innovative and ready. So what has been the challenge in Europe? I think one of the issues is that in a way Europe outsourced parts of the mining and processing capacities and expertise in the last decades. There was a big underinvestment actually in these areas, and at the same time also a very strategic industrial policy, price policy of the Chinese mainly with regard to critical minerals. What we now are trying to do, but what is challenging is indeed to build up new capacities in an environment which is marked very much by high cost structures. Also still challenges with regard to permitting, with regard to regulation, and in general still too few capacities actually when it comes to critical minerals. A big challenge is the concentration and the bottleneck of the midstream. And what I see with concern is really that while we still have quite good, I would say, strategic assets and midstream companies in Europe, we have the danger kind of losing them and also losing the capacities, and that's why I call it strategic assets also in this regard. So I think before or meanwhile also building up new capacities, we also need to see how we need to protect the existing production capacities that we have. So this is quite important, and obviously the geopolitical weaponization is heavily concerning us. I think the Chinese administration showed quite well with the export restrictions from October 9th. What is kind of also for the future next potential instruments that can be used, and this should worry us and be quicker also in speeding up kind of our own efforts. And when it comes now to the defense sector, we have there the challenge that usually the defense sector has quite a small volume demand when it comes to the critical minerals. So while I see it as an important nucleus and related kind of to the question of national security and resilience, I think this helps a lot in the method kind of that we do. But at the same time, it needs kind of also this buy-in and commitment with regard to the different industrial sectors. On the good side, on the plus side, I would argue that we have quite a strong still industrial and engineering base, also expertise, knowledge along the whole value chain. I mean, when I look at Germany, we have still a lot of mining and metallurgy, chemical, and furthermore engineering and industrial knowledge, expertise. also when it comes to tailings, when it comes to recycling, when it comes to actually everything when it comes also to technology and innovation. So I think there is also much more potential to properly use this. And also, I think it was mentioned also in one of the other discussions, we have still also good, I would say, innovation and skills system. Also there, of course, there is a need to optimize this and also to attract more, let's say, from the educational point of view, more skills and people to these areas. So we need more, I think, mining, processing, recycling influencers, so kind of that the young people also see that it's a very interesting ecosystem to work in, because it's also a lot about technology, a lot about high tech. So I would argue we need to use it much better.
Thank you, Anne. Just allow me a question to emphasize the last part of my question before about the interaction and the acknowledgement of different sectors of the needs to do something on the raw material side, because I fear that most of the sectors are not necessarily looking too far into their upstream and support of raw materials to their products. But how do you see that in Germany? Is it changing? Is there more attention from downstream on the need of raw materials, not only in defense?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the situations kind of in the past, also with COVID, but obviously especially related kind of to the export restrictions now with an Xperia case. I think this all has definitely alerted much more and also made companies invest much more in their risk management, also in their supply chain diversification. Still, and also from the government point of view, we have seen also a change, I would say, in our own strategy, especially kind of with the establishment also of the Raw Materials Fund in Germany, which is up to 1 billion and co-investing with equity into projects. We still need this to be operationalized, that's true, and when we see kind of the different instruments needing to come together, I think for me the framework around it is really the framework of economic security that we see in the EU, very much looking into forming kind of a coherent strategy to deal with the challenges according to protect, promote and partner, so kind of having all the elements. But there also we need a very precise approach, because the different raw materials and also going into the different industrial chains, let's say, be it on magnets, be it on batteries, be it on semiconductors, just to name 3 critical components, is very different. And so there also the strategies kind of with regard to diversification and resilience are different, because we also need to take into account where we have strategic European capacities and assets here that we can use and that we can build around it, and even look into the future, kind of where are the let's say USPs, the comparative advantage of German and European industrial players in this mix. I think is quite important, because as was said also in other panels, we are in this technological competition actually, and we have kind of a good base, I would say, within industry, but we really need to be very precise and use our instruments in a good way or in a balanced way according to the different needs.
Now turning to the Netherlands, Allard, how can Europe secure its defense minerals and related value chains? What is happening in the Netherlands to meet those needs?
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. I'm not going to repeat what the colleagues have already mentioned as the predicaments and approaches. Perhaps a couple of issues to add. First of all, I think it's absolutely vital with regards to building up resiliency in the defense industrial sectors that we have a fully transparent logistics and materials value chain established. So really identifying all the steps from mine to application and all the processing steps in between, including the choke points and control points. So in order to have an attempt to build up greater resiliency, you will have to understand each and every step along the way and its ownership and its liquidity in the market. That is what we have done in the Netherlands and are in the process of continuing to mature. But more than 80-20, I believe we're there, basically. I think the other thing that is helpful in this context is that we established a Dutch critical raw materials observatory that monitors, if you like, all the inputs and outputs and supply, demand, ownerships of the 34 critical raw materials, and the REEs will be added to it. But that observatory does allow us to provide us with an unbiased source, almost the encyclopedia from a sourcing perspective and understanding perspective. We've established financial opportunities through a vehicle called Invest International that will allow financing opportunities to create new value chains abroad, as well as in the Netherlands, also via our export credit agency. So there's a couple of initiatives hopefully facilitating, but I think most importantly at this juncture, because I think when you listen carefully to each and everyone's contribution, and not necessarily of the colleagues here today on this panel, but across the board and 24/7, 12 months per annum, is how challenging and difficult this predicament is we're in. And I attempt and I aim to turn it around, and I think the Netherlands seeks to turn it around and call it an opportunity. There's an opportunity to create greater resiliency. There's a great offering. The Netherlands in particular can offer fantastic logistics through our infrastructure. The ports are second to none. The connections with the hinterland, with the industrial clusters in Germany and in Belgium and in France and even Switzerland, Italy is second to none. So we're seeking to establish strategic stockpiling, and the facilities are there in country present already. So it's a matter of setting about it rather than continue to evaluate and intellectualize at 30,000 feet. And the attempt and the aim of the government is to start with that stockpiling. Some of the pilots that we're using are related to the defense industry with the new built Navy frigates. We're reaching out to the Belgians, we're reaching out to the French for their efforts in building up the naval capability in the country so that we share, and that's also part of the discussion I had earlier today with my colleague from the NATO, but also here in the UK with reaching out with the Ministry of Defence. And we're seeking to create opportunities to bring back production facilities into the country. The industrial clusters, as I alluded to, are very, very strong. They're very well interconnected with other industrial clusters. So wouldn't it be a great outcome if production facilities would come back nearshoring into Europe, not serving just the Netherlands, but serving, if you'd like, via the Netherlands, the gateway to Europe, some 250 to 300 million Europeans. Final two comments to make, not to forget about. One is the circular aspect of everything we do, because anything that we can actually reuse, we don't need to buy and develop from virgin materials. So circularity is a very important component in our equation. And last but not least is innovation, because if we can innovate our ways out of this predicament, if we don't need lithium batteries, but we have sodium batteries, we have an entirely different equation as well. So I think there's many strands and pillars that we seek to build upon. Most certainly not on our own. The Netherlands is a small country, relatively small industrial base as well. Yet, for instance, we're one of the most important investors in the US, so we have very strong international ties. We've always been a trading nation, and we seek to create coalitions of the willing along various value chains with like-minded, similar outcome intentions, and an understanding, and then I'll wrap up, and an understanding that we will need to change our understanding of the market dynamics, because if we continue to do what we've always done, we're not going to get a different outcome. So I'm very much in favor of a strong public-private partnership structure, not necessarily for governments to be involved for 20 or 30 odd years, but certainly, say, for an initial 10 years. And that might look like, I'm not saying it should and it will, but it may look like governments with private enterprises being prepared to agree on offtake agreements, contract for differences, minimum return guarantees, open book economics even, just to get this industrial opportunity. Let's not forget the word opportunity going. And I'd much rather learn all the tricks of the trade while being on the pitch than try to understand them from the from behind my spreadsheet.
Thank you, Allard. I like really this turning into an opportunity, and that's clearly something that we have to underline. Let have a smooth shift again back to the defense side. How can NATO and allies improve their understanding of current defense industrial capacity and potential bottlenecks across the entire supply chain, starting with the raw materials? Zoe.
So thank you very much for the question, Rolf. And again, thank you for the kind invitation from Resourcing tomorrow. It's great to be here actually from a NATO perspective for the first time, to be able to bring the views of the political alliance here to this conversation. And to give a few perspectives from our side. I mean, the alliance is clear that we're facing the greatest threat since the Cold War. Allies are rearming at pace. At the Hague summit this summer, they agreed to spend 5% of their GDP on defence by 2035. 3.5%. I can shout louder. So, 3.5% of that being on core capabilities, but 1.5% of that as well being on enabling activities, being on investing in that resilience, being on investing in preparedness, and being on investing in industrial capacity. And that's needed because the capabilities that we need at the moment for the threats that we're under require a 400% increase in surface-based air and missile defence, thousands of tanks and millions of missiles. So we've got a big job of work to do. And the key point that I would make here is that when we're talking about industrial capacity and supply chain security, that's not background noise in the conversation at NATO. It's absolutely front and centre, seen as part of our conversation on ensuring that we've got a reliable deterrence and defence agenda. So it's really important to us. So what are we doing at NATO? So NATO is in and of itself a convening body. We set standards, we set requirements. We are not a legislative body, we're not a regulatory body, and we don't have cash. So what is it that we've been doing? So a couple of years ago, we established the Defence Production Action Plan. And this really reset the way that NATO is looking at the industrial capacity and supply chain piece of work. We used to be very good at this. In the Cold War days, we used to have significant plans that looked at, from capability targets, how it is, and we were going to ensure that those capability targets could be delivered through the industrial spectrum. Through the peace dividend, it's another piece of work that we didn't have too much activity within at that stage. So within the Defence Production Action Plan, we reset our priorities, processes, and we were given a mandate to look at aggregating demand, better understanding defence production and industrial capacity challenges, and also supply chain security work. So as we return to collective defence, we return to collective actions, bringing allies together to look at these problems, look at where we're taking risk, and then look at the potential solutions within that. So looking at how we increase our readiness and resiliency of our defence industry that supports our defence plans. What's different in the way that we're doing it? A couple of things that I would point out up front is how we're engaging with industry. So we are bringing industry into these conversations, into our Defence Industrial Production Board that we've established, in order that we can inform our policy making, inform our policy thinking with industrial expertise and understanding, and not just the primes, but across a different range of industry as well, that can really help us shape our policy thinking on this. Also, we're seeing much more engagement from the allies in bringing in what was previously considered very national sovereign activity, how they're looking at how they're approaching defence industrial planning and defence industrial expansion, bringing that conversation into the NATO arena so that we can look collectively at the actions that are being taken by allies to be able to see where the strengths are and also to be able to see where we need to focus more specifically. On critical raw materials, this time last year, we released our first list from NATO of our 12 defence critical raw materials. And this was agreed by our defence ministers, and this allowed us to, and it was developed with industry, and this has really allowed us to have something to focus on. So those critical raw materials that we need to then look at as a focal point to understand, okay, where are we taking risk in our defence plans and with these critical raw materials, and then what mitigating measures do we need to put into place collectively? And that doesn't have to be all allies at 32, but groups of allies coming together with their areas of expertise, with their areas of national strength to be able to look at reducing risk for the alliance. And as we're having that conversation on risk as well, we're standardising how we discuss risk with the 32 allies. we're standardising how we're assessing this. We're bringing together expertise that didn't work together before necessarily, in order that we can have a much more thorough and informed conversation at the alliance level. And just my final point that I'd make on this, as new approaches in terms of how we're looking at risk in defence plans requires us to look at new relationships. So as an alliance, we're informing ourselves more by bringing in the science and technology organisations, academia, and working with different constructs, so across the spectrum, in order that we can have a much more appropriate approach to how we're looking at data-driven decision-making regards to supply chain and industrial capacity. Thank you, Rolf.
Thank you, Zoe, for this insight into NATO accountancy and also all of the initiatives. Now I turn to Peter. What platforms and initiatives can better connect industry actors along the value chain to ensure long-term security? And immediately, let me add to it, what do you expect from the Resource EU as a second part? What does Europe needs to complement the CRMA to make it efficient in line with all of the ambitions that we have?
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Rolf. Look, I think the very first thing to say is that just in the same way as Adam said that critical raw material supply is a national security issue for the United States, it's become that for Europe as well. I mean, the whole journey began with getting the materials that are needed for the decarbonisation journey and for the digitalisation of the European economy. But over time, what's come to the forefront is the defence and security. It's economic security, it's preparedness, it's resilience. And what I think is particularly powerful is when governments say things like, you have to eliminate foreign entities of concern from your supply chains if you want to do business with the government after a certain date. Give people enough time to prepare. And I think that's one thing that can be done through networks and partnerships. Concretely, there's going to be a discussion tomorrow at the European Industry Association for Aerospace and Defence to discuss how much these companies understand their supply chains and how far up their supply chains their visibility goes. And they need to understand where things are coming from, where the potential, what kind of nature of supply chain risks can materialize, and then they need to think about what they can do about it. So that's one concrete network, reaching out to the aerospace and defense industry collectively for more confidential follow-up discussions. Second thing is that the European Commission, under the Critical Raw Materials Act, has just activated this demand aggregation, collective purchasing platform, which is opened during Raw Materials Week on the 18th of November. So it's open for project promoters who are looking for European partners, and it's open for European companies, whether they're from the civil economy or the defense and aerospace ecosystem, to come in and say, well, my specific company level needs are only this much, but maybe we can pool that demand and get more negotiating leverage to deal with the problem. Nevertheless, I think there's still a fundamental gap, and this is something that the European Initiative for Energy Security has recommended in a recent report on the financing of critical raw material value chains. There's no single place where all the key actors can sit around the same table. That's to say, people who have the supply side, people who are in the downstream user sectors, people who are in the private finance space, people who are in the public finance space, and the governments. And that's why one of the key things is been recommended is to create what we call the European Minerals Investment Network, to actually have that function of convening and helping to get the right kind of projects moving. And then to come to your second part of the question, 3 weeks ago, when all this threat of the 9th of October Chinese export restrictions was still, a loaded gun, the Commission President made a speech in Berlin saying the way that we're addressing things on critical raw materials isn't powerful enough. Therefore, we're going to have to step up the investment side, step up the international diversification, step up the circularity, basically put our actions on steroids. And I think what we need to see tomorrow when this Resource EU plan comes out is money on the table. Because one of the defects of the Critical Raw Materials Act compared to the CHIPS Act is there was a process to designate strategic projects. But then you were left with, and so what? Where's the money to deliver the projects? And that's the first and foremost thing that needs to be addressed tomorrow. And I hope the European Commission is able to live up to that level of expectation. But the second thing that needs to happen is something that changes the behavior of companies so that they pivot away from the lowest cost commoditization of the critical raw materials and are prepared to look at things which put a value on the resilience and either producing in Europe or producing with friends.
Indeed, supply security, the risk not to be socialized to society, but to be incorporated in the business model. I don't have the time, I think, for a second round, and I always want to include the audience for asking questions. So, is there a mic in the room here? And I would invite you to raise a question to this exquisite panel. It's a unique chance that you have to meet all of those people here on stage. There is a question here, but I fear I'm lagging a mic. Can I have a mic? Or you stand up and you... Yes, please, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Rosalind, and I'm with the Eurasian Critical Minerals Association, which I'm about to start. My question, so I used to work for the UK government. I used to work for the UK government, and I was involved in the 22 critical minerals strategy, and so studied this area. And it seems to me that China and now Saudi have been successful because they take the approach of looking what they need and then making an integrated business. Are there plans, well, I think the US is moving towards this, but are there plans to take that sort of integrated approach to secure these metals essential for defense applications?
May I give it first to Adam and then Zoe? So the simple answer to that, I think, is yes. That is what we are all hoping to achieve, is some sort of vertical integration, be it between even at a single company or a small consortium of companies, or if we can do it amongst a consortium of international partners. Right, and I think there are a lot of opportunities in that space for us to all come together, and develop in this ecosystem. Beyond just industrial partnership and integration, though, I think there's a recognition now that, certainly from an international partnership perspective, we have to do a better job at creating a market that can, support and enable those sorts of investments and partnerships to endure. So perhaps even more important than finding that exquisite supply chain that may or may not exist or that we may or may not be able to form is certainly the necessity to underpin that with national support and a market that works.
Zoe, please.
Yeah, so just very briefly on that, so I think I'd take it into two ways, your question there. So in terms of how are we looking at it from a capability perspective, from the very, very one end of the value chain to the other end of the value chain. And this is where we're looking at kind of different risk assessments and different mitigating measures that could be applied across those different levels of the value chain. But the actions that will be taken that arise from that will rest with the allies. And this is where I have a slightly separate perspective, which is that there should be more collective approaches in order to bring together those groupings of allies who wish to be able to take collective measures, so building on their strengths in order to be able to reduce the risk that we've got across some of our platform vulnerabilities. So at NATO we're doing that through a project that we launched at the Hague Summit. So we brought together 16 willing allies who agreed to work on stockpiling and also recycling measures together. So I think there's promising work ahead. So thank you.
Please go ahead, Anna.
Just to complement from an industrial point of view, I think there is a lot of opportunity actually for collaboration, and a lot of the actors are already collaborating because it also means, in a way, sharing of risk and sharing of costs. So I think I see it very much within industry and also across between industrial clusters in Europe and internationally. I see it between industry and governments. There again, kind of, we are in the process of even kind of defining more this contract of public-private partnership that is needed. But I also see it at government-to-government level. So kind of having this alignment, be it in NATO, be it in the G7, also in general internationally, be it when I see kind of the projects investment from JOGMEC, from the US, from the French side now, from Germany. So I think there is a lot of opportunity actually here to work together, and we definitely need it.
Allard, please come.
I can be very brief, because this is exactly what I meant to say. Public-private partnerships, full value chain, address the first choke point, and then you build up and build out. So I fully agree.
One more last question.
Okay.
No more questions? Then I thank you, first and foremost, the panel, you, the audience. And I think we had a good discussion, and one thing I repeated years and years ago was, it's a man on the moon moment, and we have to turn risk to opportunities, and we don't have to forget the circularity and the innovation that all of this will strive in industries along the value chain. So thank you very much. A round of applause for the panel. And I hand over back to you.